Every morning in Ohio, USA, the lights of McDonald's, the restaurant with the golden arches, came on before the sun did. The smell of oil, coffee, and warm bread filled the air as the day crew prepared for another shift. One worker always arrived early. He pulled on the red uniform, straightened his name tag, and took a quiet breath. The job wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. And once, it had been fair. Back then, the place had a manager who believed people mattered. Not friendly, not soft, but just. Hard work was seen. Effort was respected. Under that leadership, working at McDonald's felt human. Then that manager was gone. The replacement arrived without warmth and without patience. His voice was loud, his temper sharp, his obsession clear, money first, always. To him, McDonald's wasn't a workplace, it was a machine. And machines didn't need dignity. Move faster. You're replaceable. Don't think. The words cut deeper each day. The worker tried everything. Longer hours, perfect performance, silence in the face of humiliation. But the harder he worked, the more he was crushed. Orders were shouted. Mistakes were exaggerated. Respect disappeared. Late one night, alone inside the McDonald's dining area, he wiped the counter and stared at his reflection in the glass. A thought passed through his mind, heavy and bitter. The world suffers not because of the violence of bad people, but because of the silence of good people. He didn't remember who said it, but he felt it was true. At that moment, he was just an employee of McDonald's. No one yet knew that McDonald was also his name, and no one yet knew how powerful that name would become. The next weeks at McDonald's felt endless. The new manager's anger grew sharper, more personal. He watched the workers like a predator, waiting for mistakes. And somehow, his eyes always returned to the same name on the badge. McDonald. At first, it amused him. So, he smirked one afternoon, tapping the badge with a finger. You think you own the place? The worker said nothing. He had learned that silence was safer. But inside, something tightened. His full name, McDonald's, had never mattered before. It was just a coincidence, a family name passed down without power. Here, under the golden arches, it became a target. Shifts were changed without warning. Breaks disappeared. When customers complained, right or wrong, the blame always landed on him. The manager enjoyed it. Control fed his ego. One night, after a 12-hour shift, Mac overheard him laughing in the office. People like that should be grateful, the man said to another supervisor. Jobs are mercy. Mac felt his hands shake. He remembered a quote he had once read online during a sleepless night. Power does not corrupt. Fear corrupts, perhaps the fear of a loss of power. The words settled deep in his chest. This wasn't about work. It was about domination. And domination always needs a victim. Still, Mac showed up the next day. And the next. Because when you have no safety net, endurance becomes courage. But the storm was coming. And the man who thought he owned McDonald's had no idea he was about to fire the very name that would one day outrank him. It happened on a Friday. Fridays at McDonald's were chaos. Long lines, loud voices, no time to breathe. The kitchen was overheated, the air thick with tension. Everyone moved fast, afraid of being noticed for the wrong reason. That morning, the manager arrived angrier than usual. A delivery was late. Sales were down. Something had gone wrong somewhere, and he needed a target. His eyes found the familiar name on the badge. Office. Now, the room fell silent. Inside the small office, the door closed softly, almost politely. The words that followed were anything but. You think you're special, the manager snapped. You think that name means something here? Max stood still. His heart pounded, but his voice stayed calm. I've never said that. That's the problem, the manager replied coldly. You don't say anything. You just watch. I don't trust people like you. He threw a folder onto the desk. Papers spilled out, attendance records, notes, twisted versions of small mistakes. You're done, he said. Pack your things. For a moment, Mac didn't move. The world felt unreal, like sound had been turned down. Then a sentence echoed in his mind, one he had read long ago. When injustice becomes law, resistance becomes duty. He didn't resist. Not yet. But he remembered. He walked out of McDonald's without shouting, without begging. The uniform felt heavier with every step. Outside, the sky was gray. Cars passed. Life continued. He had no job, no backup, no plan, only a name. McDonald's. and the quiet certainty that this was not the end, only the breaking point before something else began. The door of McDonald's shut behind him with a soft click. No drama, no witnesses, just silence. Mac stood outside for a long moment, holding the small box with his name tag and a pair of worn gloves. Cars passed. A customer laughed. Somewhere inside, fries kept cooking as if nothing had happened. That hurt the most. He walked. No destination, just movement. Each step felt heavier than the last. By nightfall, he sat on a bench near a bus stop, staring at the ground like it might offer answers. What now? He checked his phone. No missed calls. No messages. The world had not noticed his fall. A bitter thought crossed his mind, followed by words he had once read and never forgotten. They can take away your job, your comfort, your pride, but never your truth. He repeated it silently, like a shield. For days, Mac applied everywhere. Restaurants, warehouses, stores. When employers asked why he left McDonald's, he answered carefully. Truth, without bitterness. Still, doors stayed closed. Nights were the worst. In cheap rooms and borrowed spaces, he replayed the moment in the office again and again. Not with anger, but with clarity. He realized something painful and important. The manager hadn't fired him for mistakes. He had fired him because he could. And that, Mac understood, was the purest form of injustice. But injustice has a weakness. It assumes the story ends there. Weeks passed. Time stretched thin when every day felt like survival. Mac learned how loud silence could be, how rejection emails sounded the same as no response at all. Still, he kept moving. Still, he refused to become bitter. One afternoon, far from the noise of the kitchen, in a quiet corporate office many states away, someone opened a file. The main corporate office of McDonald's was reviewing employee records nationwide. It was routine, numbers, performance, turnover. Faces rarely mattered, until one name slowed the scrolling. Donald's, Mac. The executive paused. Not because of sentiment, because of curiosity. Performance reports stood out. Perfect attendance. Consistent praise under the former manager. A sudden termination under the new one. Marked behavioral issues. That didn't align. The executive leaned back and thought of a quote he admired. In matters of conscience, the law of the majority has no place. Something about this didn't sit right. He looked deeper. Complaints against the same local manager appeared in other files. High turnover. Fear-based management. Profits up, but people gone. The name McDonald's appeared again in his thoughts. A man removed. Too easily. The executive closed the file slowly. And for the first time since being fired, Mac's story was no longer in the hands of the man who destroyed it. Justice, quiet and patient, had just noticed him. The phone rang on a Tuesday morning. Mac almost didn't answer. Unknown number. He had learned not to expect good news. Still, something told him to pick up. Is this McDonald's? The voice was calm. Professional. Yes, he replied carefully. This is corporate headquarters at McDonald's. We're calling regarding your previous employment. For a second, the world stopped. He stepped outside, the city noise fading behind him. His heart beat faster, not with hope, but with caution. We've reviewed your record, the voice continued. There are inconsistencies in how your termination was handled. We'd like to talk. Mac thought of a line that rose naturally in his mind, as if it had been waiting for this moment. Truth does not need to shout. It waits. He said nothing. He listened. They asked questions. He answered honestly. No accusations. No anger. Just facts. Dates. Words spoken. Silence endured. At the end of the call, there was a pause. Mr. Donalds, the voice said, we believe your skills were underestimated. We'd like to offer you a position, one that reflects your record, not your removal. Mac closed his eyes. This wasn't pity. This was recognition. The voice added, it will place you above the management level of your former location. The meaning was clear. The system that had erased him was now elevating him. When the call ended, Mac stood still for a long time. Then he whispered a thought that felt older than him. Justice may walk slowly, but it never forgets where it's going. The balance had begun to shift. Mac stood in front of the building he once left with nothing. The McDonald's looked the same. Same sign, same doors, same parking lot. But everything else had changed. This time, he wasn't wearing a red uniform. He wore a dark jacket, a clean shirt, and a badge that no longer belonged to the kitchen. The title beneath his name was quiet but powerful, Regional Operations Supervisor. McDonald's. Employee. Then outcast. Now authority. As he stepped inside, conversations softened. The air felt tense, uncertain. People sensed something before they understood it. From the office, the former manager looked up. Their eyes met. Recognition came first. Then confusion. Then fear. Mac remembered a quote he once saved on his phone during his hardest nights. The moment the powerless become powerful is the moment truth becomes dangerous. He felt it now, not as revenge, but as gravity. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't smile. "Good morning," he said calmly. "I'm here for a full review. No insults. No anger. Just presence." And presence, when backed by justice, was enough. The office felt smaller than Mac remembered. The desk was the same. The walls were the same. But the man behind the desk was different. The confidence was gone, replaced by careful movements and forced politeness. Is this some kind of visit?" the manager asked, standing too quickly. Mac remained calm. He placed a folder on the desk, thick, organized, undeniable. "A routine evaluation," he replied. "One that should have happened a long time ago." As he spoke, he thought of a quote that had followed him through the hardest days. When you stand on truth, even silence becomes an accusation. He didn't need to raise his voice. The facts did that for him. Employee turnover, written complaints, witness statements, patterns of abuse, profit gained at the cost of people. The manager's hands trembled slightly. "This isn't personal," Max said. And he meant it. "It's professional." For the first time, the man who once enjoyed fear now tasted it. Mac looked around the office, the place where his dignity had been taken. He felt no pleasure, only clarity. Justice wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. And the balance had finally shifted. The review didn't end in the office. Mac asked to speak with the staff. They gathered slowly near the counter of McDonald's, unsure, whispering among themselves. Some recognized him. Others didn't. A few remembered the quiet worker who used to stay late and never complained. Mac stood where orders were once shouted at him. He didn't accuse. He didn't dramatize. He told the truth. He spoke about respect, about dignity, about how fear increases profit only for a moment, but destroys everything in the end. As he spoke, a quote formed in his thoughts, steady and certain. "Justice is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of fairness." Faces changed. Some nodded. Some looked down. One employee wiped away tears. For the first time, they felt seen. Mac then returned to the office. Corporate instructions were clear. The evidence was complete. The manager was placed on immediate suspension pending termination. No shouting. No scene. Just consequences. As the man packed his things, he avoided Mac's eyes. The silence was heavy. Mac watched calmly and thought. The day you are judged by the rules you created is the day you understand justice. When the office door closed, something shifted inside the building. Not relief. Hope. After the decision, the building felt lighter. Not louder. Not happier overnight. Just lighter. As if something heavy had been removed from the air of McDonald's without anyone needing to name it. Mac stayed longer than required. He walked the floor, watched the rhythm of work, listened more than he spoke. He remembered what it felt like to be invisible, and he refused to let that happen to anyone else. One young employee hesitated, then asked quietly, "Why did you come back?" Mac paused. He thought of everything he had lost, and everything he had learned. A line surfaced in his mind, simple and true. Justice without humanity is just another form of power. "I came back," he said, "because places don't change by themselves. People do." By the end of the day, temporary leadership was assigned. New rules were set, not about speed, but about respect. Not about fear, but about fairness. As Mac left the building, he looked once more at the golden arches. He realized something important. Justice didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace. And peace, once earned, was something worth protecting. News traveled fast inside the company. The story of the fired worker who returned above management moved quietly through McDonald's corporate circles. Some spoke of irony. Others spoke of correction. Mac understood it differently. Names, he realized, carry weight only when character fills them. At a regional meeting, an executive mentioned him. "McDonald's," the man said thoughtfully. "You remind us of something we forget too easily." Mac listened from his seat, hands folded, calm. He thought of a quote that had stayed with him since the hardest nights. Be careful how you treat people on your way up. You may meet them again on your way down. It wasn't bitterness, it was warning. Policies changed after that. Not dramatically, quietly. Systems for reporting abuse. Reviews that listened instead of ignored. Small shifts that protected people who had no voice before. Late that evening, alone in a hotel room, Max stared at his reflection. Once, the name McDonald had been used to mock him inside McDonald's. Now it stood for accountability. And accountability, he knew, was the highest form of justice. A month later, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a call. A real envelope, carefully addressed, McDonald's. Inside was a handwritten note from one of the employees at that same McDonald's. You don't know me well. I was too scared to speak before. I just wanted to say thank you. Things are different now. I feel human again. Mac read it twice. He sat quietly, the weight of the words settling in. He thought of a quote that fit the moment perfectly. The smallest act of justice is worth more than the loudest promise. He hadn't come back to punish. He had come back to correct. And correction, he realized, creates ripples you never see. That night, he placed the letter in a folder with others, messages from workers across the country. Stories that sounded too familiar. Stories that once ended in silence. Now, they didn't. Mac understood then that justice wasn't a single moment. It was a responsibility, and he was ready to carry it. Weeks later, Mac received another message. The former manager, the man who had fired him, was appealing the termination. He wanted a review. A second chance. The request landed on Mac's desk. For a long time, he didn't open the file. He remembered the humiliation, the fear, the nights without sleep. The moment he walked out of McDonald's with a box in his hands and nowhere to go. Anger would have been easy. Instead, a quote surfaced in his thoughts, quiet but sharp. An eye for an eye will only make the whole world blind. Mac reviewed the case carefully, not as a victim, but as a leader. The evidence didn't disappear just because regret arrived late. At the meeting, he spoke clearly. Justice doesn't mean destroying someone, he said. It means drawing a line that cannot be crossed again. The decision stood. The former manager wouldn't return to McDonald's, but the company offered him support to transition, training, guidance, a way forward that didn't involve power over others. Mac closed the file. Mercy, he understood, wasn't weakness. It was strength with boundaries. Months passed. The changes held. At McDonald's, employee turnover dropped. Complaints decreased. Quiet confidence replaced fear in places where fear once ruled. No headlines announced it. No speeches celebrated it. That was how real justice worked. Mac visited locations across the USA, sometimes unannounced. He watched how managers spoke to workers. He listened to the pauses, not just the words. He had learned that tone reveals more than policies ever could. In one restaurant, a young worker stayed late to help a co-worker clean. Mac noticed. He nodded, just like that first fair manager once had. The memory stirred something in him. He thought of a quote that now felt personal. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. Justice had come full circle. It started with one man being treated like nothing. It continued with that same man choosing not to become the thing that hurt him. Mac realized then that his story was no longer about revenge. It was about responsibility. And responsibility, once accepted, changes everything. Years later, the story was told quietly. Not as a legend. Not as a miracle. Just as an example. People spoke of a man who once worked at McDonald's, who lost everything because of cruelty, and who returned with power, but chose fairness instead. They spoke of how injustice had been exposed, corrected, and transformed. McDonald's never talked about that chapter unless asked. When he did, he kept it simple. He would say, "Justice isn't loud. It doesn't arrive on time, but it always remembers who was wronged." And sometimes, when he was alone, he thought of the words that had carried him through the darkest days. The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. Standing beneath the golden arches, he understood the truth at last. Justice hadn't just found him. It had changed him.